Welcome back, everyone, to Srila Prabhupada, our Founder-Acarya 2014 edition. And this is the signature lesson of the seminar. This is the lesson that best represents the whole seminar, and for that reason it has the same title as the whole seminar. Srila Prabhupada, our Founder-Acarya. So way back when, in lesson 2, we examined the Founder-Acarya principle, its origin, its evolution, and characteristics. In this lesson, we'll look at our own Founder-Acarya, Srila Prabhupada, and how he realized and revealed his position as service to his Guru Maharaj, to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and to all generations of his followers. So there in the slide we see Srila Prabhupada graciously accepting what appears to be a toy from a little girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old, at Bhaktivedanta Manor in the summer of 1973. And the point of the slide is that this little girl has just as much opportunity and rights to have a primary, foundational, core relationship with our Founder-Acarya, as does Prabhupada's Diksha-initiated disciple, Hemabhakti Mataji, in the background. That's the point of the image. We all have different Shiksha and Diksha gurus, but Srila Prabhupada is foundationally related to all generations of his followers. And that's how he lives forever. He lives forever not by his divine vapu, which is certainly divine because it was used body, mind, and words in Krishna's service. Not by his divine Murti, which is certainly divine because we worship that Murti. And once Prabhupada was even asked, can we communicate with you in your Murti form? And Prabhupada said, yes, that depends on your purity. But he really, really, really lives forever by his divine instructions. And as Prabhupada noted in the dedication to his Bhagavatam, for his Guru Maharaj, his Founder-Acarya, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he lives forever by his divine instructions, and the follower lives with him through those instructions. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at some prophecies. Usually what I do when I'm live, at this point I turn to the audience and I say, who would like to describe orally, out loud, right now, in 108 words or less, who would like to describe your relationship with Srila Prabhupada as it stands right this moment? And most people are too shy to do that. There's 1 or 2 brave souls raise their hand. And then I ask them as a kind of homework to think about that. And to not only think about it, but to capture it in words. Just very briefly, 108 words or less. Because what we do at the end of the seminar live is we look at those statements and we see how our journey through this seminar has influenced people's relationship, hopefully for the better. But right now we're going to look at some prophecies, both Puranic and Gaudiya, that our Founder-Acarya, Srila Prabhupada, fulfilled. And so, the first one most people don't know, some people do. It's a Puranic prophecy that Srila Prabhupada fulfilled. Of course, in the image there is Srila Prabhupada famously beating on the tom-tom. Before there were mridungas in America, and there's Brahmananda and Achyutananda dancing in either Washington Square or Tompkins Square Park in New York City, summer of 1966. So the Puranic prophecy is this, that the holy rivers were very concerned that Krishna is still on the planet, and after he leaves, which is going to happen soon, that Kali Yuga will come in full force, and all the folks in Kali Yuga will come and dump their sinful activities in their holy waters, their sacred waters. So they approach Ganga with their concern. Ganga thinks it's a good issue, so she takes the issue to Dwarka, to Krishna, and in the Brahma Vaivarta Purana, she says, quote, "O Lord, we can see that your pastimes are about to end, and people are becoming more and more materialistic. You have been very merciful to us. After you leave, however, all the sinful people of Kali Yuga will bathe in our waters, and we will become overwhelmed with sinful reactions." Smiling, the Lord replied, "Be patient." And here are the words on the screen. "After 5,000 years, my mantra upasaka, worshipper of the holy name, will appear in this world and spread the chanting of my holy name everywhere." Now that's a quote from the Brahma Vaivarta Purana 4.129.51. You can Google it and you'll see it. But don't do that now, listen up. And then there's more to the quote. Krishna continues. He says, not only in Bharatvarsha, but also all over the world. This is all over the world because his mantra Upasaka is going to inspire people all over the world. Will chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And then Krishna continues. He says, by this chanting, the whole world will become Eka Varna, one designation, namely Hari Bhaktas, devotees of Lord Hari. And because the devotees of Lord Hari are so pure, anyone who contacts them will become purified from sinful reactions. These pure devotees will visit Bharatvarsha and purify you of sinful reactions by bathing in your sacred waters. So see what Krishna did there. He took Ganga's own concerns in her own words and turned it right around on it. And said, no, they're not going to, you won't be polluted by overload of sinful reactions. With these devotees, they're going to come from all over the world, those who have been inspired by my mantra Upasaka, my worshipper of the holy name. They're going to bathe in your sacred waters, and they'll purify you. And now, here is the last line of the prophecy, which I point out to the audience, is the only line that Prabhupada told us. And then before I tell them the line, I ask them to think of why this was the only line. And the line is, this period of worldwide chanting of Hare Krishna will continue for 10,000 years. So usually there's somebody in the audience who knows that it's the only line Prabhupada told us, because if he told us the background, then we would immediately have said, oh, you're that person. You're it. You're the one. And of course, that wasn't the way of our Mahabhagavat Uttama Adhikari Nityasiddha Shakyavesh Founder-Acarya. He was so utterly and absolutely transparent to Krishna that he was always directing people to Krishna. Even if people know of Hare Krishna in the world today, there's less of a chance they know about Srila Prabhupada, because unlike so many gurus, swamis, and yogis who began to come to the West, starting way back in the 1890s, our Founder-Acarya was simply focusing people's attention on Krishna. He wasn't focusing people's attention on himself. It wasn't the Bhaktivedanta Swami movement. It was the Hare Krishna movement. So that's the Puranic prophecy, the mantra Upasaka prophecy that Prabhupada fulfilled, recorded 5,000 years ago by Srila Vyasadeva. And now just 500 years ago, within more recent history, we have a Gaudiya prophecy that Prabhupada fulfilled, And it's centered around another concern. The first concern was by Ganga. Now this concern is by Narada Muni, who is a compassionate yogi, who is such a yogi he can travel anywhere within the material and spiritual worlds. So as recorded in the Gaudiya Shastra called Sri Chaitanya Mangala by Srila Lochan Das Thakur, Narada Muni once upon a time went to Goloka Navadvip, the Navadvip quarter within Goloka, in which Lord Chaitanya is eternally performing his Sankirtan Lila. And Narada Muni approached the Lord and expressed also a concern about Kali Yuga, not for himself. In this case, it was for the people, and how downtrodden and misled and confused and sinful and suffering they'll become. He has Trikalagya, vision of past, present, and future. He can foresee how bad it's going to get. So, just as Lord Krishna assured Ganga, so in his form as Lord Chaitanya, he assured Narada Muni, as recorded in Chaitanya Mangala. And the verse sounds like this, quote, "With the powerful chopper of Nam Sankirtan," the Lord tells Narada Muni, "I will cut the hard knots of demoniac desires from the hearts of everyone." And here's the Bengali, the key Bengali verse reads like this. Yadipapi charit dharma dure deshe yoy mora senapati bhakta yai de tatoy, which means, quote, "Even if the sinners reject religion or flee to foreign countries, I will send more Senapati Bhakta, my military field commander, to go there and deliver them." So this, of course, is exactly what our Founder-Acarya did, traveling the world 14 times in 12 years, turning atheists into theists, believers into non-believers, sinners into saints. And he created faith in the faithless by delivering the real goods, knowledge and experience of Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Prabhupada himself, as he was doing this, he very often used military metaphors. It's right in his Bhagavad Gita. He writes in the purport how one must execute Krishna consciousness, practice Krishna consciousness as if in military discipline. Bhakti has disciplines. In order to uncover our spiritual senses, we have to purify our material senses so they're transparent and no longer an encumbrance. So Prabhupada would also call the book distributors soldiers, and the books going out, he would say they're like bombs, which were dropping into the laps of the conditioned souls. So in many ways, it was like a military campaign, a full-court press, to use a metaphor from sports, on the kingdom of Maya. Temples, schools, farms, restaurants, all at once was manifested in the wake of Prabhupada's travels. So that's the Gaudiya prophecy within the last 500 years. And within the last, say, 125, 130 years, there is a prophecy that many devotees know, which we'll go through now, by one of our Gaudiya Acharyas. In fact, it's the Gaudiya Acharya who's the pioneer, as Prabhupada called him, of the Krishna consciousness movement all over the world. And of course, that's our Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who not only spoke, but published this prophecy in his Sajjana Toshini journal, Sajjana Toshini, for the satisfaction of the Vaishnavas. Quote, "A personality will soon appear in order to preach the teachings of Sri Chaitanya and move unrestrictedly over the whole world with his message. Srila Prabhupada himself thought it was fortunate. I'll just read you the quote. This is from an excerpt from his Disappearance Day lecture for Srila Bhaktisiddhanta in LA in December 1968. Prabhupada remarks, quote, he, 1896, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, wanted to introduce this Krishna consciousness movement by sending this book, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, His Life and Precepts. Fortunately, that year was my birth year, and by Krishna's arrangement, we came in contact. I was born in a different family. My Guru Maharaj was born in a different family. Who knew that I will come to his protection? Who knew that I would come in America? Who knew that you American boys will come to me? These are all Krishna's arrangements. Famous rhetorical flourish by his divine grace. So what we do now in the lesson is we take a look at all of these arrangements, as Prabhupada put it, that Lord Chaitanya made to send his Senapati Bhakta, to send his military field commander to just the right place, at just the right time, in just the right environment. And these historical stage settings took place starting with his own appearance. As the slide reads, in the 16th century, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan movement ignited a bhakti renaissance in India. And at that time, Lord Chaitanya mystically, transcendentally spread, reignited Krishna consciousness all over the subcontinent of India, or as it's known in Vedic language, Bharatvarsha. He was encouraging everyone to explore an intimate relationship with the Supreme Personality. Godhead, as Lord Chaitanya's chief biographer, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, said within the fourth verse, in the very first chapter of the whole Sri Chaitanya Chaitamrita, may that Supreme Lord, who was known as the son of Srimati Shachi Devi, be transcendentally situated in the innermost chamber of your heart. Resplendent with the radiance of molten gold, he has appeared in the age of Kali by his causeless mercy to bestow what no incarnation ever offered before, the most sublime and radiant mellow of devotional service, the mellow of conjugal love. So in India, Lord Chaitanya, he was encouraging everyone to explore in the innermost chambers of their heart that intimate relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As we know, though, within 100 years after his disappearance, 150 years, he allowed his bhakti renaissance to be eclipsed by so many pseudo-Vaishnava sects, upper sampradayas, imitation devotees, to the point where the bhakti marg, it lost all credibility. For all intents and purposes, it went underground. So that's the next information on the slide. In the 17th and 18th centuries, when Lord Chaitanya's movement was forced underground in India, the age of discovery and the Industrial Revolution brought technology and new horizons to Europe. We may wonder why Lord Chaitanya allowed his bhakti renaissance to be eclipsed like that, to go underground for centuries. Well, he had his reasons. And one, with 20/20 hindsight, we can see, is that Lord Chaitanya is inspiring people in the West where they're just getting a kind of reflection of the Renaissance, the real Renaissance, the spiritual Renaissance that Lord Chaitanya brought to the East. It's reflected in the West by humanity throwing off the shackles the shackles, for example, of a corrupt church in Rome, and they're exploring the outer world. They're probing outer space with a telescope, Galileo. They're going deep into the Lord's illusory energy at the molecular level with a microscope, and they're sailing around the world, discovering new places in the world. So the whole world starts to be populated in the age of discovery and the Industrial Revolution. Material technology, what Krishna called the yantra technology, is on the ascendant. Now, by the 19th century, in the late 19th century, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur revived Lord Chaitanya's pure teaching and envisioned a worldwide movement of Krishna consciousness. Because in his own Leela, after Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur rediscovered Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, whom he called his Eastern Savior, because Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his Leela, he was raised, in a Christian environment with access to, Western civilization. But when he finally rediscovered Lord Chaitanya's teachings and single-handedly reestablished their respectability, at least amongst the aristocracy of Bengal, the Bhadralok. And not only that, reached out with those pure teachings to transcendentalists in the West, who had now sprung up in the West. Ralph Waldo Emerson in America, Henry David Thoreau, and other places too. The Thakur was envisioning how we can finally make the prophecies, the Gaudiya prophecies, start to come true that were in books like Sri Chaitanya Mangal and Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat. Prativiti Achayata Nagarari Gram Sarvatra Prachar Haive Moranam. It had been predicted hundreds of years earlier by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as reported in these sacred texts, that his holy name would be sung in every town and village on the earth. Nagarati Gram. But it wasn't happening. It wasn't happening. And the Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur was determined that this would start happening. So he envisioned a whole global Hare Krishna movement. As we know, everything from the GBC, the Thakur envisioned, right down to Namhat, Bhakti Vriksha, from the macrocosm to the microcosm. He envisioned it. But he knew he didn't have time to manifest it. So he prayed for his ray of Vishnu's son, whom he got in the person of his fourth son, Bimal Prasad Dutt, who later became Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And as the caption here now says, in the early 20th century, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's Gaudiya mission spread Krishna consciousness throughout India and sent the first Vaishnava preachers abroad. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta reignited the Renaissance. Again, the subcontinent of India was swept up in Sankirtan, with Srila Saraswati Thakur establishing 64 Gaudiya Maths, initiating, according to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhav, the trilogy biography that Bhakti Vikas Maharaj researched and wrote over a 20-year period, initiated some 60,000 disciples. I understand that means Harinam, not that everyone was Gayatri Diksha, with 64 rounds, but at least Harinam, 60,000 disciples. And as the caption here says, he also in the 1930s sent the first Vaishnava preachers abroad, which we saw in the Founder-Acarya lesson. We also saw that after his disappearance, unfortunately his mission fragmented, but fortunately at least one disciple completely, utterly, absolutely took up the spirit of his mission, and that Gora Shakti coming through Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Srila Gaura Kishore Das Prabhuji, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, was born across the ocean and by the mercy of our Founder-Acarya took firm roots in the West. Now, before Prabhupada came, though, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he made some very interesting last historical stage settings so that his Senapati Bhakta could come just to the right place, at the right time, and the right atmosphere. And that's what this slide is showing. In the 1960s, when Srila Prabhupada sailed to the West, here's the first stage setting. It's a religious adjustment. The Vatican relaxed its attitude toward other religious teachings. This, of course, is a reference to the Second Vatican Council, sometimes called Vatican II, which Pope John the 23rd called in the 1960s a very popular pope. Some similarities to today's Pope Francis. Just as today's Pope Francis is trying to make the Roman Catholic Church more relevant and more in the spirit of Jesus today, trying to be more compassionate, both internally and externally, within and without the Church. So Pope John also was trying to make the Church more relevant, and one of the resolutions that came out of Vatican II, of course, Pope John, he died in office, but fortunately his successor continued the council, the conference. And in 1965, the very year Srila Prabhupada came to the West, they concluded that council, and the resolution most relevant for Prabhupada's coming was that for the first time, the Vatican ever in its history of the Roman Catholic Church, going back, to the time of King Constantine in the 4th century, dropped its claim of exclusivity. It was no longer necessarily true that if you weren't a Roman Catholic, you were necessarily going to hell. The Church acknowledged that God's grace could manifest in other teachings. So this gave subtle but very powerful permission for Roman Catholics worldwide to appreciate other faith traditions. And as we say in the seminar, there's one Roman Catholic of the day in 1966, the year after Prabhupada came. He was living on the Lower East Side, and he was walking down the street one day, going from his job at the welfare office to his apartment to eat lunch, and he was walking down 2nd Avenue, and at 26th, he saw somebody inside that storefront that for all the world to him looked like the Buddha, because he had been reading Buddha's teachings. He didn't have time to stop, but he noticed a sign in the window that said Bhagavad Gita classes Monday, Wednesday, Friday evenings. So he went back later, because that person inside that storefront, he had big earlobes, he had a shaved head, he was wearing peach-colored robes, he was sitting in a cross-legged position. So it struck a chord with this young man. So the young man went in, and he heard Swamiji, as they were calling him at the time, give a Bhagavad Gita class. And then he asked a question after class. Swamiji, how can I understand that I'm just nothing? A very Buddhist-type question. How can I understand that I'm just nothing? Because that's, as we know, that's the Buddhist solution to suffering. You extinguish your ego, you extinguish your desires, you extinguish your individuality, and therefore you extinguish your suffering. Unfortunately, you also extinguish yourself. That's why it's Shunyavad. What is it? The operation was a success. Unfortunately, the patient died, as the joke goes. So Swamiji's reply was, you're not nothing, you're something, but you're not this body. So that began a relationship between this young man and Srila Prabhupada, which later in the summer, Actually, it was summer had crossed over into fall by the time this young man took initiation. His name was Stephen Guarino. He took initiation. He became Satsvarupa Brahmachari. And 6 years later, in 1972, he became Satsvarupa Das Goswami. And 6 years after that, in 1978, after Prabhupada had left this world, he was asked by ISKCON's governing body to write Prabhupada's authorized biography. So, as Prabhupada said, these are all the arrangements of Krishna. Now, that's just the religious adjustment that Lord Chaitanya made. The next part of the caption on the slide, it says, the USA relaxed its Asian immigration laws. So growing up in America, I never saw an Asian person where I was living. In Stamford, Connecticut, which is kind of like a so-called bedroom community for New York City. It's in the southwestern part of Connecticut, right down near the city. My father used to commute just 35 miles into the city to work. So we never saw Asians. Maybe a few older Chinese who ran a Chinese laundry, in some part of town, but there wasn't any, certainly the Indian diaspora, the great dispersion of Indians hadn't happened yet all over the world, as there are now. But in 1965, the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service, the INS, now subsumed under the Department of Homeland Security, relaxed what had been absurdly restrictive Asian immigration laws, probably because Japan had been our adversary, our enemy in World War II. We just didn't see a lot of Asians. But they started to appear. And they did that relaxation, again, right in the year Prabhupada came over on the Jaladuta. But the biggest adjustment, the biggest stage setting, fine-tuning that Lord Chaitanya made to send his Senapati Bhakta was the last one. And the American counterculture began to look to the east for truth. Lord Chaitanya gave our Founder-Acarya an audience. Prabhupada had no audience to speak of in India. Certainly, India's government and business leaders, after they got independence from Britain in 1947, they were not interested at all in a spiritual revolution. They were not interested in even Gandhi's plain living and high thinking, in what Gandhi called Swadeshi, living locally, producing only what you need, using only what you produce. They were interested in becoming just like the West. That was certainly Nehru's move, become a modern industrial power. Still pretty much the mood, although the new Prime Minister, Modi, he appears to be sympathetic at least to devotional concerns, like cleaning up the sacred rivers, etc. Anyway, so Prabhupada said before he came to America, he was crying alone in the wilderness. As his missionary spirit was rising after his spiritual master left and after his master's mission fragmented, he wanted to do what his spiritual master wanted them all to do, especially if they were educated. Take Krishna consciousness to the West and all over the world. So, when he came, he found an audience. He found a whole generation of young people looking to the East for truth. Those of us who remember, we were reading Eastern things, Autobiography of a Yogi, The Eastern-Inspired Be Here Now, by Alan Watts, the Pied Pipers of our generation, the Beatles, they were being influenced by Ravi Shankar, George Harrison, and then the Maharishi at first. They were disappointed by him, and then they got darshan of SrilaPrabhupada. So these are all the arrangements of Krishna. Now in the next line, we're going to see how alone in America, Srila Prabhupada tried to revive Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's Gaudiya mission. This image, of course, was taken after the fact, because Prabhupada, he was alone in America when he came in 1965. After being in Butler, he went to New York City. He only knew one impersonal Swami named Dr. Ramamurti Mishra, with whom he had a kind of mixed relationship. They were friendly, but Prabhupada, of course, was a Vaishnava. He was following the impersonal path. Anyway, Dr. Mishra kindly did give Prabhupada a room to stay in for some time. And basically from the time Prabhupada came over to America to the time he started ISKCON, he was doing two things. He was studying Americans. He was really checking them out. And he was writing a lot of letters that fall, in those fall days, in 65, back home to his godbrothers in the Gaudiya Math. And the mission isn't fragmented, but of course they were taking care of their individual maths. So he was saying, basically, I'm here. By Guru Maharaj's grace, Mahaprabhu's grace, by their mercy, I made it to America. And what I'm finding is simply amazing. I'm finding a whole generation of people who are mad after yoga, meditation, but they're naive. And, the Prabhupada even talked about, the Ramakrishna mission, which sort of reincarnated as the Vedanta Society in America. And Prabhupada was saying in different letters you can read if you have the database, with their 10th class philosophy, the Vedanta Society is flourishing, whereas we Gaudiya Math people, we've become beggars because of our non-cooperation, fragmentation, we've become beggars. But what's done is done, better late than never. I'm here, and I'm ready to cooperate with you. He's writing his godbrothers, and what I'm going to put on the screen here is probably the best of the letters, sounding that cooperation theme, which Prabhupada, of course, sounded to us. And here is an excerpt from a letter he wrote to one of the movers and the shakers in the Gaudiya Math, Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj, who knew how to raise funds, knew how to organize, and he's in charge at the time of the flagship temple of the Gaudiya Math, what had been the flagship temple in the mission in Mayapur, Sri Chaitanya Math. And here's the excerpt. Quote, so here is a chance for cooperation between us, and I shall be glad to know if you are ready for this cooperation. I came here to study the situation, and I find it very nice. And if you are also agreeable to cooperate, it will be all very nice, by the will of Srila Prabhupada. Of course, he means Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. If you agree, then take it for granted that I am one of the workers of the Sri Mayapur Chaitanya Math. That is the flagship Math for the Gaudiya mission. I have no ambition for becoming the proprietor of any Math or Mandir, but I want working facilities. Listen to the tone, look at the content. Look at the content and the intent. What is Srila Prabhupada trying to do? He's trying to revive the Gaudiya Math, the Gaudiya mission, which is fragmented. We've been fighting now for 30 years, almost 30 years. In 65, let's see, Siddhanta Saraswati left on New Year's morning, 37, yeah, going on 30 years. What's done is done. Better late than never. He wants to revive his spiritual master's dream mission of spreading Krishna consciousness all over the world, collectively, cooperatively. What is he saying here? If you agree, then take it for granted that I am one of the workers of the Sri Mayapur Chaitanya Mutt. That's the mutt that Bhakti-Vilas Tirtha Maharaj is in charge of. So he's saying to Maharaj, look, you can be in charge, but I'm here, and this Vedanta Society, Prabhupada said it elsewhere in the letter, they've got $1 million building here, and people are coming to them in droves. They're successful. We've got the real goods. We've got the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the message of Mahaprabhu. We can do it, and I know you can do it. Prabhupada saying to Bhakti-Vilas Tirtha, because he says in another part of the letter, by Guru Maharaj's grace, by Srila Prabhupada's grace, you have those Calcutta Marwaris, the famous businessmen, the Marwaris, in the palm of your hand. And I know you can inspire them to spread Sri Chaitanya's message all over the world, per Shastra. And you can get the government India to release those funds. You can do it. So there was some kind of non-committal response from Bhakti-Vilas Tirtha Maharaj, indicating he could possibly help, and then he simply avoided. He didn't help. There are so many letters you can read in 1965, in the fall of 65. Nobody wanted to cooperate. Nobody could cooperate. The aparad was too great. The aparad of trying to replace the Founder-Acarya and working, and not only not cooperating, but fighting in the courts of who owned the assets of Gaudiya Math. So over that first year, what Lord Chaitanya revealed to Srila Prabhupada is that they're not going to cooperate. They can't cooperate. You're going to have to go it alone with your Guru Maharaj and me. So, reflecting on this period, later on, Srila Prabhupada wrote a letter in 1972 to Sudama, who was a sannyasi at the time, who was also a New Yorker. And here's an excerpt from the letter. Quote, when I was alone in your New York, I was thinking, who will listen to me in this horrible, sinful place? All right, I shall stay a little longer. At least I can distribute a few of my books. That is something. But Krishna was all along preparing something I could not see. And he brought you to me, one by one, sincere American boys and girls, to be trained up for doing the work of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Now I can see that it is a miracle. Otherwise, your city of New York, one single old man with only a few books to sell for barely getting eatables, how he can survive? What to speak of introducing God consciousness movement for saving the humankind? That is Krishna's miracle. Now I can see it. Yes. So, with hindsight, Prabhupada could see that, even though he couldn't see at the time, because he wasn't getting any positive response from his godbrothers. But undaunted, he wasn't one to be discouraged. Now we're going to the next slide. At first he had some place to speak in the Bowery, then if you know the history, he had to leave that place. The crazy hippie became violent. Prabhupada begged Michael Grant, please try to find me a place, which to his everlasting credit, Mukunda Maharaj did, 26 2nd Avenue. Ignored by his godbrothers, the slide reads, Srila Prabhupada was obliged to found a fresh branch of the Gaudiya Sampradaya. He had no intentions of doing that. He wanted to revive Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's mission. better late than never, but they couldn't do it. They weren't allowed to do it by the gravity of the upper eye. So on July 13, 1966, in New York City, he incorporated, quote, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, ISKCON, and signed the papers with his sannyas name only, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. From the obscurity of 1965 in New York, he at least had gone to Swamiji. So, what else? Yeah. Okay. Now that was in 1966. So we're going to fast forward 1 year now to a very dramatic event that happened in ISKCON's history, where Srila Prabhupada is still Swamiji, but by the following July, as you see now in the new slide, he's all bundled up there because in the spring of 67, Prabhupada had a stroke which really compromised his health. And it really was a wake-up call to the devotees who were used to relating to Swamiji as some kind of Superman, because it seems like he could just play the drum all day, preach all day, do everything, cook, clean, travel, inspire everyone. But he did have this stroke. And so after the stroke, he started his daily massage. He started his morning walk. And directly after the stroke, he gave the devotees in 26 Second Avenue his first chapter, and also at 518 Frederick Street, the second chapter in the Haight-Ashbury. He gave them a prayer, and it was the Namaste Narasingaya prayers, or the Shringa prayers. So there was a wake-up call that after all, Swamiji, as wonderful as he is, he's appearing in an elderly body. We've got to take care of him. So at first, after the stroke, he tries to get better in Long Branch, New Jersey, the Jersey Shore. Didn't work. It was cloudy, it was chilly. But he was getting letters. Swamiji, come west, come to sunny California, where you can get better. And we're going to have a Rath Yatra, because as you might recall, earlier that year in 67, Melanie, had found little Indian figurines, and Prabhupada said, is there more? She found one, and then she found all three. As you know, she shoplifted them, classic counterculture style, or she, as the word was of the day, was she liberated them. That's how we used to say, liberated. So Swamiji had her husband, Sam, who became Sham Sundar, carve the first deities. And so they had a Rath Yatra in July 1967 on a flatbed Hertz rented truck. But Prabhupada, he was so weak still that he couldn't go. And he was all bundled up also on the West Coast because, as Mark Twain once quipped, the coldest winter I ever spent was a summer in San Francisco. Those of you who know the Bay Area climate, it's like a perpetual autumn. So Prabhupada, he was up in Marin County at Stinson Beach at a little bungalow, Spanish bungalow called El Paradiso. And he's openly saying to the devotees who stayed back from the Rath Yatra, Mukunda, Kirtanananda, Hayagriva, he's openly saying that he's got to go back to India to get his health back. He's got to go where it's warmer, where he can have access to Ayurvedic medicine, Ayurvedic therapies. So they're really worried because, after all, they're just brand new Vaishnavas. They're really thinking of themselves a lot. They're thinking, what's going to happen to us if Swamiji doesn't come back? What happens if he dies? What should we do? So the way Mukunda Maharaj tells it in the Lilamrita, and even more detail in his book Miracle on 2nd Avenue, which is a wonderful account of the launch of Krishna consciousness in New York, San Francisco, and London. He says he was more or less coerced to ask Swamiji a question that he didn't want to ask by the other two, Kirtananda and Hayagriva. And so here's the question. Quote, when you die, what will happen to the movement, I asked. Will you have a successor who will continue your work and look after our spiritual education? So Mukunda writes, after he said that question, he says, as I heard myself say the words, I realized it had been a mistake to ask this. The Swami sat silently, looking out the window at the sand dunes and the mountains. It was high tide, and I could hear the waves pounding the beach. Gulls shrieked. The Swami muttered something quietly. I couldn't hear what you said, Swami, I said carefully. Can you repeat it? And here on the screen. Actually, it is an insult to the spiritual master, he said. Let's see. Yes, an insult. He turned away from the window and looked at me pensively, as if he was hurt by my question. I'm sorry, Swami, I said. I felt like shrinking into the carpet. He closed his eyes. Outside, a dog barked. A shallow stream of tears appeared below each of his eyes and flowed over his cheeks. He slowly wiped them away. My spiritual master, he said, and his voice choked to gravel. I was stunned. What had I done? And now on the screen, my spiritual master, he said. He was no ordinary spiritual master. He paused again and then whispered falteringly, he saved me. Now look at that phrase, ordinary spiritual master. You're going to hear it again in the follow-up to this very dramatic and historic exchange where Prabhupada's starting to make it clear that nobody can replace him, that Lord Chaitanya is uniquely empowering him by dint of his unique surrender to make international Vaishnavas. Here's the follow-up. The follow-up appears in another book called The Hare Krishna Explosion, which Hayagriva wrote later. And Hayagriva, he also tells the same story. And you hear the same phrase, ordinary spiritual master. Here's how Hayagriva tells it. Some of the devotees, that's himself, although he doesn't say it, worried that Swamiji has decided to go to India to leave his body, asked him whether during his absence one of his godbrothers should come to America to assume ISKCON leadership. The minute this question is presented to him, we sense that it is offensive. Swamiji becomes very grave, closing his eyes, and for a moment he seems to consider it. Then suddenly we see tears falling down his cheeks. And now here's the same thing Kunda reported. My Guru Maharaj, he was no ordinary spiritual master, he says, wiping away the tears. He saved me. Now here's the comment that Prabhupada made later on in the day about what happened. Scrolled in. Later, Swamiji tells us what we should have always known. There is no one to replace him. The very idea is insulting. If someone comes and tells you something different, he says, you will be confused. So Prabhupada, he's still Swamiji to them. He's gone from obscurity to Swamiji. He's not Prabhupada yet, but he's making it very clear that he is Prabhupada. He hasn't said the word Prabhupada, that he is their core relationship, their core identity, and that no one is being allowed no one has the empowerment, no one has the depth of his surrender to actually know how to plant the Bhakti Lata Bij and bring them along in an appropriate way, the way he is being empowered to do. He's made that momentous decision to found a fresh branch of the Gaudiya Sampradaya. It's not another Sampradaya, it's the same Sampradaya. But he has to make a clean break from the debacle of the Gaudiya Math, because Lord Chaitanya has just shown him over many, many months that they can't help you. They won't help you. In fact, I'm not going to allow them to cooperate. They can't do that. But you can do it. By my mercy and by the mercy of your Guru Maharaj, you can do it. So that's 1967. He's gone from obscurity in 65 to Swamiji in 66 to only he in 67. And now, fast forward to 1968, 10 months later, it's May 1968. You're going to see how Swamiji goes to Prabhupada, how Lord Chaitanya creates a situation for Prabhupada actually to reveal the appropriate address for him. He's not going to demand it, but he's going to command it. And here's how it happened. Okay. Before we do this, I just want to introduce a couple of balancing quotes from that last "Only He Could Lead Them," because just leaving it that, we might, and Prabhupada did not want this, to get a negative view of his godbrothers. And he made that very clear in especially one purport in the Bhagavatam and one letter to Brahmananda. Here's the Bhagavatam excerpt where Prabhupada gives a very broad, generous view of all the godbrothers of the mission, even though the mission is by this time fragmented. Quote, "The disciples of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj are all God brothers. And although there are some differences of opinion, and although we are not acting conjointly," that's the very word Srila Bhakti Siddhanta used, he wanted them to work conjointly, "although we are not acting conjointly, every one of us is spreading this Krishna consciousness movement according to his own capacity and producing many disciples to spread it all over the world." Very balancing and broad and generous lines by Prabhupada. That's in Bhagavatam 4:28-31 purport. And then here's another reference to Brahmananda, or a letter to Brahmananda in the same mood. This is very early, 18th of November, 67. Quote, "Even amongst our godbrothers we have misunderstanding, but none of us is astray from the service of Krishna. My Guru Maharaj ordered us to execute his mission combinedly. Unfortunately, we are now separated, but none of us have stopped preaching Krishna consciousness. Even if there was misunderstanding amongst the godbrothers of my Guru Maharaj, none of them deviated from the transcendental loving service of Krishna." So we have to keep that in mind, that Prabhupada wanted us to be respectful to his godbrothers, who are everlastingly our seniors. And at the same time, when we hear this "only he could lead them" exchange, he's reminding us not to seek guidance from them about how to spread Krishna consciousness worldwide. He is being uniquely empowered to do that by dint of his unique surrender to the order of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Our Founder-Acarya was empowered to do that. And not only that, but to communicate that unique mood and mission to all who strictly follow his teachings. Okay, so that "only he" incident is setting the stage for the next step, where Swamiji becomes Prabhupada. And it's a situation that Lord Chaitanya directly created. And here is the slide. Prabhupada is looking very humble, introspective, meditative, from Swamiji to Prabhupada. The situation is, it's 1968, it's May, it's Boston, Massachusetts. Prabhupada's decided it's time for the first batch of second initiates. We're going to have Brahmin initiation, and fittingly, it's happening in the city of Boston, where the phrase Boston Brahmins has already been current since the time of the American transcendentalists in the 19th century, who knew about things like Brahmins and yoga and transcendence and samsara, things like that. So that phrase has already been extant. Boston Brahmins. That's what a writer of the day in the 1860s quipped, Oliver Wendell Holmes, who said, you know, the best of the Bostonians, they're like Boston Brahmins. Okay, so it's May 68, and serving Prabhupada in the capacity of secretary and servant are Govinda Dasi and Gaurasundar, early disciples of Srila Prabhupada from the West Coast in 67. And in her memoir of how Swamiji became Prabhupada, Govinda Dasi tells on the following Srila Prabhupada DVD, number 1, brilliantly executed by Yadavar Prabhu. Govinda says this, quote, all along everyone knew him as Swamiji. This is up until May of 1968. So Gaurasundar decided he wanted to call me Govindaji. And so he asked Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, no, actually, G is a third-class form of address. It's better not to call her Govindaji. So I piped up. I was sitting right in front of him, and I said, well, if it's a third-class form of address, why are we calling you G? Why are we calling you Swamiji? So there's the question. There's the question. And then Govinda says, and he said, it's not very important. So that's Prabhupada's initial reaction. It's not very important. He's making it clear that he could lead them. But he's not demanding, he sees the mood in egalitarian America. He's not demanding some big title, big moniker like that. So he said, first he tries to brush it off. He said, it's not very important. Then Govinda says, I said, oh no, it's very important. If it's a third-class form of address, then we don't want to call you that. Now, it's hard to imagine somebody challenging Prabhupada like this, but you have to understand that Prabhupada allowed a very familiar relationship between himself and Govinda Dasi. It was almost like grandfather, granddaughter. So she felt very comfortable and affectionately challenging Prabhupada like this. Oh, no, it's very important. If it's a third-class form of address, then we don't want to call you that. And now, here's how the exchange goes. Follow the exchange very closely. You see the situation Lord Chaitanya is creating. See how Prabhupada initially responds, and then see how his response evolves. Here's how Govinda reports it. And there it is on the screen. We want to call you the most first-class form of address. So tell us, what would be a good name for us to call you by? And then Govinda says, and he was very humble, very reluctant, but I pressed him. So Lord Chaitanya is inspiring something here. He's inspiring Govinda to press him, and Prabhupada is going to change his response. So Govinda says, we've got to change this. And he said, this is what Prabhupada says first, you can call me Gurudev, or Guru Maharaj, or Prabhupada. So I said, well, that's 3. We need 1. So, which one is the best? And he answered, Srila Prabhupada is nice. That is the best. So I said, from today, you will be called Srila Prabhupada. And then after that, Govinda says on the memory, so I told all the devotees. Some of the devotees didn't like it because it's kind of a tongue twister. Prabhupada and Swamiji kind of flows more easily, but we gradually started calling him Srila Prabhupada from that time. So you see how Prabhupada responded to Lord Chaitanya's indications. First of all, he tried to brush it off. He became very humble, very shy. This is not important. Govinda pressed him. And then he throws out 3 names. Right? And 2 of them are generic. Gurudev, Guru Maharaj. And then she presses him. Okay, which one's the best? That's 3. We need 1. And then Prabhupada gave the one that actually was befitting his position. Although they, of course, still didn't understand it. They didn't know that Prabhupada is a master of masters. It's a master at whose feet all masters sit. That you don't replace a Prabhupada, etc., etc. But anyway, that's the situation Lord Chaitanya created for Prabhupada to at least give the name. Now, you fast forward 2 months, or 2 years, 2 months later, the very month I joined, and there's a famous Founder-Acarya type photo, which Prabhupada himself said you can use as a Founder-Acarya photo. Again, my godbrother Bhargava took it at Bhaktivedanta Manor. Those famous summer 1973 shots where Bhargava captured Prabhupada in so many moods. So on July 28, 1970, when Srila Prabhupada legally established a governing body commission to manage ISKCON, and of course that did come from Bhaktivinoda Thakur, through Bhaktisiddhanta, which didn't manifest in the Gaudiya Math, but now it's manifesting. He formally identified his relationship with his mission. So if you have the database and you go to Directions of Management, you will read this. Quote, International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Incorporated, Founder-Acarya, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Okay. So this, when I joined that month in Boston, and there was something in the air when I joined, and we'll get to it in a later lesson. There was tension in ISKCON, and Prabhupada's having this legal document, and then he also formed the GBC. This document is called Direction of Management, and further down in the document, he names people to be his GBC representatives. What Prabhupada is doing here, he's trying to solidify the mission. He's trying to ensure that what happened to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's mission, Gaudiya Math, does not happen to ISKCON. And that, of course, is the fragmentation of the mission. So a full 7 years before he disappeared, our Founder-Acarya started training people to take over the management, to become what he called later the ultimate managing authority. He was bound and determined that it not fragment. So that's what he did. And the very next day, on July 29th, our Founder-Acarya separately incorporated the BBT as a further hedge, a further protection, that God forbid it, but if anything did happen to ISKCON the way that it happened with the Gaudiya Math, that at least there would be separately incorporated a legal entity called the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, which actually, by the way, didn't really get up and running for another couple of years. It wasn't until May 72 that something started to happen with that. It was ISKCON Press. Okay. Now, even though Prabhupada did found the GBC and formally, legally announce his position vis-a-vis his own institution, that he's the Founder-Acarya, because we didn't really know what that meant so much, and because we were young and wild and just trying to control ourselves, wild things happened in ISKCON. And so the next slide, 4 Julys later, Prabhupada, he saw the urgent need to reassert his position as Founder-Acarya by approving an amendment that he himself instigated. He actually gave the GBC the components of the amendment. They drafted the wording, and then he signed off on it. So this is, to this day, the strongest statement of Prabhupada's supreme position in ISKCON per an amendment that he made to Direction of Management. Drafted on July 22, 1974, Prabhupada instigated and approved a GBC amendment to his earlier management document reasserting his supreme position in ISKCON. Quote, "It is declared that His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, is the Founder-Acarya of ISKCON, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. He is the supreme authority in all matters of the society. His position cannot be occupied by anyone else, and his name and title must appear on all documents, letterheads, publications, and buildings of the society." And the reason those were specifically named was because both on books and on stationery and on buildings, Prabhupada's position was either minimized or not even recognized. And today we can add websites in this electronic age. Just for fun, when I was presenting the seminar in a very prominent temple of ours, shall remain unnamed, protect the innocent, I went on the homepage of this major temple's website to see how they were presenting Srila Prabhupada, and I could not find him on the homepage. I finally clicked on a tab that said History, and sure enough, a little picture, a little blurb, giving some cursory information about Prabhupada. I went to one of the managers of the project and said, "Prabhu, if we think Prabhupada's history, guess what? We are history." Anyway, to the temple's credit, when I came back to give more lessons a year later, at least they had him on the homepage, Prabhupada on the homepage. Okay, so let's see here. Yes. Now, lest we think that it's out of vanity or ego or for power that Prabhupada was asserting his supremacy in ISKCON, we're going to take a look now at Prabhupada's internal mood in the very same month that he had the GBC draft this amendment to the Direction of Management. He was translating Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, and right in CC, in this purport, you're going to see, well, first I'll read this. That same year, 1974, even as Srila Prabhupada was reasserting his position as ISKCON's Founder-Acarya, while he was translating the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, he also reasserted his disciplic obedience and service to his own spiritual master in the mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Here's the excerpt. Quote, "As members of the Krishna consciousness movement, we belong to the family or disciplic succession of Saraswati Goswami, and thus we are known as Saraswatas." It's like Fitzgerald, which literally means in Irish son of Fitz, or son of Gerald, or like Macintosh, son of Tosh, or I forget. Anyway, it's called a patronym. So we are similarly, we're coming in the line of Bhaktisiddhanta. We are Saraswatas. Obeisances are therefore offered to the spiritual master as Saraswat Deva, or a member of the Saraswat family. So Prabhupada not only contextualizing himself, he's contextualizing all of us in ISKCON as Saraswats. Namaste Saraswate Deve, whose mission is to broadcast the cult of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Gauravani Pracharane, and to fight with impersonalists and voidists. Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Karine. Just because Prabhupada has has been compelled to found a fresh branch of the Chaitanya tree of the Gaudiya Sampradaya, ISKCON, doesn't mean he's thinking he's a new Sampradaya. No, he's making it very clear here that we are simply the servants of the previous acharyas, and especially Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Okay. Now, over the next two slides, we're coming to the end of the lesson. It's been a little long because we had a little technical glitch in the beginning. But over the next two slides, we're going to hear Prabhupada offer a striking analogy to help us understand his position as ISKCON's Founder-Acarya. So the situation is Prabhupada's in Caracas, Venezuela, his one and only trip to the continent of South America. It's February 1975. He's lecturing on Bhagavatam 111, Janma Yasya Yataha Yaton Vayash, where Srila Vyasadeva is describing Krishna's relationship with his creation, how he's directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations like that. So here are the words. Prabhupada was saying, so here it is said that origin is life, right? Life comes from life. The origin of creation is a person. Because here it is said, Yato Vayad Itaratash Cha Artishu Abhigyak Svara, which in plain English means this. He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations, and he is independent. Now, when I go to the next slide, I'm going to try to do this right technically, where I'll disengage my mic. I'll let the Prabhupada do the speaking. You're going to have to lean a little closer now until we get a little better technology of how to figure out how to do the audio on the slides. You're going to hear Prabhupada make this very interesting analogy. Just as Krishna is the living origin of his creation and knows everything directly and indirectly of the creation, so he, Srila Prabhupada, as Founder-Acarya, similarly has that relationship with ISKCON. Okay, I'm going to disengage the mic and let Prabhupada do the talking. Hang on.
Just like if I am taken as the origin of this Krishna consciousness movement, that means I know everything directly and indirectly of all this movement. If I do not know directly and indirectly everything of this movement, then I cannot be called the Founder-Acarya. And as soon as the origin becomes a knower, he is life.
Okay, as soon as the origin becomes a knower, he is life. In other words, just as Krishna is the origin and life of his creation, so our Founder-Acarya is the origin and life of his ISKCON mission, whose uniquely empowered spirit is to be imbibed and transmitted, passed on by all generations of his followers. Which brings us to the final slide of the lesson, Srila Prabhupada, our Founder-Acarya, where I wrap it up by saying, as ISKCON's Founder-Acarya, Srila Prabhupada is the life and soul of all generations of his followers. Now, to balance that statement, lest we think we're just making some exclusive focus on Prabhupada and nobody else, no, it's not like that. Moreover, whoever enriches our foundational identity as, quote, Prabhupada Anugas, which literally means Prabhupada followers, is also glorious, deepening the cooperation we will need to take Prabhupada and Lord Chaitanya's mission of Krishna consciousness to every town and village on earth. Okay, that is the lesson. Ramananda Prabhu, before I take questions, I know it's late, maybe there's time for a couple of questions.
Well, I'd just like to make a comment. There was that quote from Srila Prabhupada, about his godbrothers, that even though, I can't remember exactly, even though they may, have problems, but still they never deviated from, 100% service of the Lord. That was very nice that you included that.
Mm-hmm. Because it's really a counterpoint to other heavy stuff that he not only said but published So it's balancing, and that's how we have to be. We have to be balanced, mature people, and not spoil our spiritual life by negative attitudes.
I have a question. Do we have any record of when the second part of Srila Prabhupada's pranam mantra was added, and there's any story about that?
Yeah, boy, I was just reading about that recently. Let's see how it went. I believe that came in just as I came in. When I came in July 70, they had just started Mangal Arati too. I know that the mantra came in. Of course, Prabhupada had to give us the mantra, which is non-traditional, because usually it's, by the disciples, but we didn't know enough, so he had to give us the essential elements of the mantra to make it clear what the mission was and how he is following Srila Bhaktisiddhanta and the previous acharyas. Where did I read that? It's there. It's a matter of me remembering who gave the memoir, because devotees were there when that happened. I'd have to research that. Is that Madhukanta? Prabhu?
Yes. Yeah, when I joined in April of 1970, it was just the first part, and I don't remember when or why he added that second, but I also remember it was shortly after I joined.
Yes. You came in April, I came in July. Yeah, that's my memory too, that was one of the things that had just come in along with Mangal Arati. The circumstance, yeah. Here it is, Madhukanta. You see, when you join in April, I join in July. This is when all this funny business is going on, where devotees in the West were getting a compromised view of Prabhupada from some jealous people, guess who, and it was weakening some people's faith, and it was manifesting in Prabhupada's name, Prabhupada, and position as Founder-Acarya not appearing where it should have appeared, and just general neglect and mistakes being made that Prabhupada took as symptoms of the fact that his position was being compromised by people. And so, I was just, where did I read this now? This was all part of Prabhupada's kind of remedial measures to protect ISKCON. He established the GBC at this point. He started asking devotees, will you help me now? Will you help me? Will you agree to become a governing body person? Of course, they didn't even hardly knew what he was talking about. But Prabhupada felt the need to protect ISKCON by legally having this direction of management, forming a GBC, identifying his mission, which is what the pranam mantra does. So that much I do remember, Madhukanta Prabhu, that this was all part of a counter move by Prabhupada to counteract, as Prabhupada called it, the poison that was coming in, that was, giving people a relativized, compromised, minimized view of Prabhupada. That much I do know. I'll have to go back and see who was there, who remembers, the details of the exact circumstances. But Prabhupada himself did dictate it. And there was even some, to this day, on old kirtan recordings, you can hear some people like Visajan Maharaj. They'll hear him say, Namaste Saraswati Devam, which is grammatical, but it's not euphonious. It's not as nice as Deve, because then it doesn't rhyme with Pracharine. So Prabhupada made it clear in a letter, you can look this up in the letters, that both are grammatical, but it's Deve. Somehow Devam came in. There was some misunderstanding with Prajumya. I don't know exactly how it got around, but originally, it might have even been the original communique from Prajumya, that Devam might have been in that original one, but then Prabhupada made it clear better, they're both grammatical, but Deve sounds better. So it's actually Namaste Saraswati Deve. Although to this day in those vintage recordings, you can sometimes hear Devam. A little funny point there. Okay, any
Thank
points?
You.
What I'm trying, sure. what I tried to show in this lesson, and let me just read you, because I have at the end of the lessons now, I have what I call learning outcomes. This is what they do in teaching. By the end of the lesson, students will be able to, number one, identify Puranic and Gaudiya prophecies that Prabhupada fulfilled. They'll be able to recount the kind of historical stage setting, both East and West, that Lord Chaitanya did for Prabhupada to come over many centuries. They should be able to describe how Prabhupada went from obscurity to Swamiji to, in my phrase, only he, to Prabhupada, to Founder-Acarya. And then finally, they should be able to identify Srila Prabhupada as the life and soul of all generations of his followers. In other words, it's a very fascinating journey in how Lord Chaitanya revealed to Prabhupada really what his position was and what he had to do. And then how Prabhupada, as he was getting more and more empowerment and realization of this, how he was gradually revealing that to his followers. Very, never demanding respect, but commanding it by his example. And how that went. So it's extraordinary. That's Srila Prabhupada, our Founder-Acharya.
Prabhuji, the point that you make is just so important. And I've never heard it before except in your seminar. It's essential. And that is when you were making historical reference to the Brahma Bhavarta Purana, where Ganga is approaching the Lord, and for concern of the waters becoming contaminated in this age of Kali by the sinful bathers, and then that quote is there about the Namopasaka. That is just so crystal clear and so profound and so important, and I like the way you explained why Prabhupada didn't quote that for us. That was for us to discover. And in all my years of being in ISKCON, I've never heard this except in this seminar. And I think it's really, really an important, essential point. And it's so enlivening and refreshing to hear it. So I'm going to thank you especially for that point.
Okay, well, I have to say that this has been a matter of public record, even though it hasn't been maybe broadcast enough. Ever since the Prabhupada centennial year, when we had the first oversized, coffee table size Vyasa Puja book, and that centennial Vyasa Puja book, the centennial minister, who was Lokanath Maharaj at the time, he published the findings of the research that ISKCON scholars did on the position of the Founder-Acharya, and this was one of the references. This and also the Sainapati Bhakta, the Gaudiya reference. So it's been out there, for 18 years now. It's 2014, but because we're still recovering from that kind of narrow focus just on the initiator, who's so important, plays a crucial role in the deliverance of the disciple. That people just don't know it because it's not broadcast, it's not relayed. So, we have to do that, and that's what I'm doing. I see myself as an assembler and a broadcaster, basically. I didn't make anything up, but I'm sure tooting the horn.
Yes. So, keep on tooting.
Keep on tooting.
Wonderful presentation, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is this Balabhadra?
Jaya Jagadish.
Oh, Jaya Jagadish. Oh, okay.
I look forward to more.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. It's getting kind of late, Ramananda. What should we do?
One little tiny technical correction. Be Here Now was written by Timothy Leary, not Alan Watts.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That was from my Mayavadi days.
Yeah,
Wasn't it Baba Ramdas? Sorry, Baba Ramdas. That's not Timothy Leary. That's Baba Ramdas.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Right, that was
what-
Baba Ramdas. Right, Baba Ramdas.
So what was
Okay.
his?
Richard Alpert. Richard Alpert.
Richard Albert.
Yeah.
That's right. Richard
Right.
Albert.
Yeah, that was
Okay.
Leary's kind of his cohort
Right.
from their
Right.
days
Okay.
together.
I'm going to Google that just to make sure you're right, because I used to say Baba Ramdas, and then somebody corrected me, and I thought I looked it up and saw they were right, but I'll check it. Okay, that's a little example. All right, let me just read the transitions to the next lesson. And the good news is that even though I'll be on the road next weekend, I'm just a little foray into North Carolina where I'm presenting the Abhideya portion of the seminar. They had Sambandha last year, now they're inviting me back for Abhideya. Don't let me go yet, Ramananda. I will be able to broadcast from my host's house in North Carolina. He's fully equipped. So here's the transition. I'm going to I'm going to say no here, Ramananda. I'm not going to let you get me out of here yet. Oh, wait a minute. I want to take you to the next. There's the next slide. And we're going to go back to the roots of the mission, because now we're moving fearlessly into the Abhideya section of the seminar. Practically my favorite lesson, his mission's roots. It ends from the instant Prabhupada meets Srila Bhaktisiddhanta until the instant he steps on the Jala Buddha. And it's just nectarine. So the transition reads, having deepened our understanding of Srila Prabhupada's relationship with all of us as our Founder-Acarya, Sambandha, we are now ready to enter the Abhideya phase of our seminar, how to act on our understanding by deepening our service through this mission. So, Lord willing, I'll see you next Saturday at noon.
Thank you.
Thank you.